Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Alberta government announced more funding to protect our seniors. We explain how the money will help protect our most vulnerable. During his campaign launch, UCP Lethbridge East candidate Nathan Newdorf explains his party's plan to bring in more doctors. And players react as the Edmonton Oilers dropped Game 1 of their playoff series against the LA Kings.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. A Manitoba Liberal MP is demanding that Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre apologize to Canadians for misleading comments about the carbon tax rebates. Poilievre was having none of it.
The climate rebate puts more money in people's pockets. 8 out of 10 families will be better off. Look at page 5 of the original PBO report, Mr. Speaker. What won't leave families better off is investing in cryptocurrency, Mr. Speaker. That was reckless advice by the Leader of the Opposition. I've invited him to stand in this House and apologize now for the 4th time. Will he stand up now and apologize to Canadians?
So I'll read directly from the report written by the Parliamentary Budget Officer who was appointed by this Prime Minister. On page 3, he says that, for example, an Ontario family will pay on average $1,820 more in carbon tax costs than they get back in these phony rebate checks. Prince Edward Island, $1,500. Newfoundland and Labrador, $1,300. I could go on. In every single province, the majority of people pay far more in taxes than they get back in benefits from this scam, Mr. Speaker. Given that it's been false, won't they axe the tax?
Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh commented on media reports that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau vacationed at the Jamaican estate of a family who previously donated to the Trudeau Foundation. He says Trudeau doesn't understand the realities of average everyday Canadians and that there's kind of a disconnect.
It's not about whether the commissioner approved it, or whether there's an ethics issue here. I'm not actually touching the ethics concerns here. I'm touching the reality that we've got a prime minister who has so much power. Like, the prime minister can actually really meaningfully fix a lot of problems that Canadians are faced with. And the fact that we see a prime minister unwilling to take a strong stance on fighting things like the for-profit encroachment of services in our healthcare system, like, he's not really doing much to fight back against that, because he's never really worried about his family member that's unable to get access to services because they can't afford it. He doesn't understand that reality. He's never really had to worry about losing his home. He's not really worried about fighting the housing crisis with everything he has. And I think that what this vacation shows is just another example of a prime minister that doesn't understand the realities of everyday Canadians.
Political reporter Brian Lilly says Justin Trudeau has not broken any ethics laws here, but it's still not a very good look for the Prime Minister.
It may not have broken any ethics laws, but it definitely looks odd when the Prime Minister says time and again, I have no intersection. I mean, what a weird way to speak to start with. I have no intersection with the Trudeau Foundation, and yet the connections keep coming. And so this gentleman, Peter Green, a longtime family friend of the Trudeau Foundation, or the Trudeau family, and a donor to the Trudeau Foundation, gave him his Jamaican estate for a Christmas vacation. Sounds an awful lot like the Aga Khan's Island. And what went on there. So I think there's going to be a lot more questions about this.
Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly will also chat about if the federal government is looking seriously at potentially taking resource rights away from the provinces. He'll explain after Business News. The union representing WestJet pilots say they have voted in favor of strike action. The Airline Pilots Association says the 1,600 WestJet pilots it represents can launch strike action as early as the week leading up to the May long weekend, which usually kicks off the summer travel season. The head of the union's WestJet contingent, Bernie Lewell, says the workers' issues revolve around job protection, pay and scheduling at the airline, and its discount subsidiary, Swoop. Lewell says he and his team are frustrated with WestJet right now.
Negotiations started with WestJet management on September 2nd of last year. It's been roughly 7 or 8 months here, and the progress just isn't where it needs to be. So with that in mind, 2 weeks ago, we initiated a strike authorization ballot, which will give the Master Executive Council the ability to authorize a strike down the line. The results came in today. 95% of our pilots voted. Of those that voted, 93% voted in favor. So that gives us a resounding mandate that we can now take to the company and see if they will come back to the negotiating table and just negotiate with us in good faith. That's what we're asking for.
Lewell says talks will continue until April 24th, followed by a 3-week cooling off period unless both parties agree to extend negotiations. Well, we had some light showers in parts of southwestern Alberta today. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, when it comes to moisture in our region, we may even see a few flurries as well.
Yeah, I'd say more than a few flurries, Hal, because this is what we're looking at for tonight. So we're looking at a 60% chance of showers this evening with a 60% chance of flurries overnight. Snow beginning by the morning and then by Wednesday, that snow turning to rain and snow. And hell, we could actually see an accumulation of 5 centimeters of snow on Wednesday. Here, I thought it was April. What happened to April showers? We're looking at more like April flurries because guess what? More snow is actually expected on a Thursday. I'll be back later in the show to give you that update for the 7-day forecast.
I won't put the snow shovel away just yet. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Nathan Newdorf and Cheryl Seaborn, the UCP Lethbridge East and Lethbridge West candidates, announced their official campaign launch this week. One of the biggest issues plaguing Lethbridge over the past few years has been the shortage of family physicians. The Chinook Primary Care website says no clinics are accepting new patients besides the Prairie Treatment Opioid Dependency Clinic. A total of 17 new doctors have been hired and are going through the process with the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta to make sure their credentials line up. Now, we asked Newdorf about what the province is doing to try and attract and retain even more doctors in the future.
This is a challenge all across Canada, not just here in Lethbridge, not in Alberta. In Alberta, we've actually seen an increase of over 300 doctors this last calendar year. And we need our share here in Lethbridge. We've also got the pilot project funding for our university to look at training doctors right here. And I think there's recent reports showing 65 to 70% of locally trained doctors in graduating classes stay in the locality where they've trained. So that's a really huge next step for us to take as a province, and I look forward to that happening as well.
It's estimated that around 40,000 people in Lethbridge are without a family physician. The province announced more support for seniors who are at risk to reduce elder abuse and to increase prevention supports. The $7.4 million funding boost will be spread over 3 years. Officials say around 10% of seniors in our province are victims of elder abuse, whether it's neglect, violence, emotional, or financial abuse. Some of the funding includes $3.2 million for the Alberta Elder Abuse Awareness Council. The funds will flow directly to support seniors and their families who are at risk of experiencing abuse. Government officials say Alberta's senior population is more than 735,000. Alberta Premier Daniel Smith said a re-elected UCP government will ensure Albertans have access to $10 a day daycare by the year 2026. Government officials say the Made in Alberta childcare agreement will invest $3.8 billion over 5 years in our province's childcare system. Officials say the agreement has already reduced fees for Alberta parents by half to an average of close to $15 a day and has created 11,063 new spaces across the province. They say parents can look forward to the creation of another 15,500 spaces this year alone. Limiting screen time when kids are online is vital to a child's health. That's according to Dr. Robin Bright, who's the Interim Dean of Faculty for Education at the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Bright says it's very important for parents to monitor their kids' online behavior, especially when they're really young.
Children under the age of 2, most experts are saying should not have any screen time or very, very little because it interferes with the development of language. It makes them a little bit less interested in the world around them. And then from that age up, it's just really important to monitor the time that kids spend online and also to be part of it with kids so that it's not something that they do all on their own. There's time for education, thinking about what it is that you're doing.
Dr. Bright will also discuss why it's very important for our kids to learn how to curl up with a good book. Watch the full interview coming up in the second half of our program. The Alberta Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction, Grant Hunter, was in Coaldale on Tuesday morning to make a couple of funding announcements. He was flanked by town councillors as support. Coaldale Mayor Jack Van Ryn explained what the 2 new projects are.
The first being for our potable underground water reservoir and pump station, that we will need to upgrade our water infrastructure in anticipation of the McCain's project that will be started here this year. And the second announcement will be for the at-grade crossing that will be crossing Highway 3 and the railroad tracks that will incorporate a pathway system that will get people from the south side of the highway to the north side so they can attend the new high school and multi-use rec center.
Minister Hunter says the funding from the province comes in at around $500,000 for each initiative.
The total quantum is about $1 million in total for those two projects. And then I had also stated that we would be repaving about 8 kilometers between Coaldale and Highway 3X. And that is the process there is started. The signs are up, so we're ready to go, and we'll have that done here this year.
Hunter says that over the past 6 years, Coaldale has received around $6 million in Municipal Sustainability Initiative grant money. The funding can go towards schools, hospital roads, or any projects municipalities are looking to complete. The province announced a $6 million investment over 2 years for Indigenous and municipal police transition study grants. Officials say up to $30,000 each can be provided for a study to determine if a local self-administered police service or a regional policing model would be the best fit. Alberta's Public Safety Minister Mike Ellis says there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to approach local policing.
Alberta's government supports communities that want to improve public safety through new approaches to local policing. This includes supporting our friends in Indigenous communities with true and meaningful reconciliation by empowering them to determine their own policing steps. Last September, we helped Siksika Nation reach an agreement with the federal government to establish a self-administered police service, the first new First Nations police service in Canada in more than a decade. And currently, the provincial government is working with a number of other Indigenous communities to explore self-policing options as well. I remain committed to these important partnerships.
To try and help deal with the opioid crisis, the Blood Tribe has set aside a large sum of money to help combat the problem. Chief Roy Fox made the announcement in a video posted to the group's YouTube page. He says $1.5 million will be used from their sourced revenue in a variety of ways to help combat the crisis.
2 immediate matters that involves provisional funding for the police task force and the housing renovation program for restoring abandoned houses. We are acquiring more of our own funds through investment returns, and we should have a total of over $1.5 million by the end of April to begin with some of these new measures.
Chief Fox adds that the Blood Tribe Foot Patrol will also implement a new mandate, which includes reinstating a curfew for townside communities. Lethbridge City Council approved its 2022 Lethbridge Annual Report. It featured a breakdown of the city's finances along with this year's audited financial statements. Officials say the report, which is available online, helps residents to understand how their tax dollars and other municipal funds are managed. They say it also shows where funding is needed to help operate and grow the city. The 72-page report is available to review on the City of Lethbridge website. Members of the Lethbridge Rotary Club are currently on the road for their 12th annual Los Amigos trip. The 3,000-kilometer journey is an opportunity for members to bring down decommissioned emergency vehicles so that they can be used in Mazatlan. The co-president of the Sunshine Rotary Club explains the importance behind sending these vehicles down to Mexico.
Huge importance. For first thing, we'll talk about the fire trucks, right? They had no fire trucks in these communities. So when a fire happened, so you can gather that they would take a truck and put a water tank on it and hope they have enough water in that water tank to fight those fires. Now we bring these fire trucks in, we bring them equipped. We bring in, for example, some Lethbridge firefighters came down a couple of years to train those people to use that equipment and save lives.
Since 2011, 44 vehicles have been sent down to the communities most in need. The NHL playoffs have begun, and it was a tough opening night for the Edmonton Oilers. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl and company lost 4-3 in overtime in Game 1 of their series against the Los Angeles Kings. The Oilers led 3-1 in the third period, but let the lead slip away.
We had the game in our hands. We just let it slip away. We took too many penalties, and then they just buried at some point. I thought our kill was really good in the second period. At some point, they have some good players out there too, and we just let it slip away. We, like Bruce said, we just got to learn from it.
We got to go back. You know, momentum changes, and momentum swung our way a little bit, and I mean that's what happens sometimes when other teams score. Crowd gets a little quieter and maybe a little bit more nervous. I can't tell you, but I think momentum was changing a lot in this game, and ended up being in our favor.
Game 2 goes Wednesday night, 8 p.m. local time in Edmonton. A legend in the world of Christian ministry has left us. Dr. Charles Fraser Stanley, the senior pastor of First Baptist Church in Atlanta and the founder of In Touch Ministries, has died. Church officials say Dr. Stanley passed away peacefully at his home on Tuesday morning. For more than 50 years, the pastor, broadcaster, and author served on staff at First Baptist in Atlanta. He founded In Touch Ministries back in 1977 to, in his words, get the truth of the gospel out to as many people as possible. His sermons, podcasts, and devotionals have been seen or heard in more than 115 million homes a week in more than 126 countries around the world. Dr. Charles Stanley was 90 years old. You know, it was slightly cooler in many parts of southwestern Alberta today. Some areas even saw some rain. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, some of the rain may even turn into snow this week?
Yeah, Hal, it looks like a lot of snow too. So we're looking at that beginning this evening, overnight, and then into Wednesday we could see an accumulation of 5 centimeters of snow mixed with rain. High of only 3 degrees, down to only 0 on Thursday, and there we go. Like I promised, more snow on Thursday, and then sunshine on Friday with a high of 4 degrees. As we get into the weekend, we get back to the double digits. High of 11 degrees on Saturday with plenty of sunny skies there. 12 for a high on Sunday, and rounding out that 7-day forecast with a high of 13 degrees on Monday. So we are kind of all over the place here. Average high for this time of year, though, 14 degrees. Average low, -1. 26 was our high temperature on this day back in 1952. And in 1951, we were sitting at -14, which was the coldest on this day. So 6:33 is when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 8:29, giving us 13 hours and 56 minutes. We are so close to that 14-hour mark of daylight. Okay, Victoria looking at 60% chance of showers tomorrow. Risk of a thunderstorm, 9 degrees for a high, 10 degrees for a high in Vancouver, looking at showers ending by noon and then clearing up after that. Edmonton sitting at 7 degrees tomorrow with 30% chance of showers. Calgary looking at a mix of snow and showers tomorrow, high of 4 degrees. Okay, as we get into the rest of the prairies here, Saskatchewan, Saskatoon expecting a 5 to 10 centimeters of snow, 0 for a high. Regina, -2. Okay, so they're looking at, it could be over 10 centimeters of snow because we are tracking that Colorado low coming in from southeastern Saskatchewan into southwestern Manitoba. That can be starting tonight through Thursday, with Friday afternoon ending the snow, tracking right across southern Manitoba. So Winnipeg looking at possibly 5 centimeters of snow tomorrow with a high of only 1 degree there. As we get to the rest of the country here in central Canada, 13 for a high in Toronto, not bad at all, mix of sun and cloud. Ottawa looking at a high of 7 degrees. Could see some snow flurries there as well. 8 degrees for a high in Montreal with a mix of sun and cloud. A pretty rainy one is expected in the Maritimes tomorrow. Fredericton looking at 60% chance of showers. 14 for a high there. 9 for a high in Halifax. Also looking at showers, 60%. Also expected in Charlottetown tomorrow, high of 13 degrees. 1 degree for a high in St. John's. Going to feel more like 1 or 5 degrees inland. Going to be a little bit warmer, and seeing also some showers tracking through that area as well. There you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Canada's inflation rate dropped to 4.3% in March as higher interest costs were offset by lower energy prices. Stats Canada reports that inflation slowed to 5.2% in February. Officials say they expect the rate to drop down to about 3% by the summer. The deceleration, however, has not brought much relief to homeowners with new mortgages or renewing their mortgages at higher interest rates. Grocery prices are also still rising rapidly, though at a slower pace than in previous months. Grocery prices were up 9.7% on a year-over-year basis in March. That is down, however, from 10.6% in February. Galen Weston, the public face and top executive behind Loblaw, is stepping down as president by the end of the year. Company officials say a veteran European retail executive will be its next president and chief executive. The parent company of the Loblaw's grocery chain and Shoppers Drug Mart says Per Bank will join the company early next year. Bank is currently an executive with Denmark's Salling Group, which operates supermarkets, department and discount stores in Europe. Tim Cook, Apple's CEO, was greeted with cheers and clapping at the opening of his company's new store in Mumbai, India. Around 300 people showed up as fans took selfies with Cook. The opening of the new location in India comes as the world's most valuable company continues to pivot to India, focusing on its potential as both a consumer market and manufacturing base. The company builds the store as one of its most energy efficient in the world, saying solar panels allow it to run solely on renewable power. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 42 points on the day to finish at 20,684. The Dow was down 10 points to 33,976. The S&P 500 was up 3 points on the day to 4154, and the Nasdaq was down 4 points to 12,153. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 8 cents to $80.91 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 11 cents to $2.38 U.S. Gold was up $9.84 on the day to $2,005.03 U.S. an ounce, and silver was up 15 cents to $25.19 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.43 per bushel, barley's at $9.12, canola's at $17.57, and corn is at $10.54 per bushel. Live cattle were up 73 cents to $176.48. Feeder cattle were up 38 cents to $205.93. And lean hogs May contract was down $2.18 to $78.83. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to $74.69 U.S. Recapping one of our top stories, the union representing WestJet pilots says they voted in favor of strike action. The Airline Pilots Association says the 1,600 WestJet pilots it represents can launch strike action as early as the week leading up to the May-long weekend, which usually kicks off the summer travel season. The head of the union's WestJet contingent, Bernie Lewell, says the workers' issues revolve around job protection, pay, and scheduling at the airline and its discount subsidiary, Swoop. There's some talk of the federal government potentially looking at taking resource rights away from the provinces. Political reporter Brian Lilly will have details for us momentarily. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Discover how Lethbridge has played an important military role in the preservation of world peace and security by visiting the Lethbridge Military Museum at the Vimy Ridge Armory at the Lethbridge Airport. The museum is open to the public each Wednesday from noon to 4 p.m. Special arrangements for other days and times can be made by calling 403-328-6196. Admission is free, but donations are gratefully accepted. For more information, visit lethbridgemilitarymuseum.org. Lethbridge Sport Council's Indoor Roving Gyms program takes place Tuesdays at Emmanuel Lutheran Church from 6 to 7 p.m. and Thursdays at the Service Sports Center from 10 to 11 a.m. This program is for kids ages 5 and under and their caregivers. Come and enjoy an hour of fun and get active. Pre-registration is required and space is limited. For details and to register, visit lethbridgesportcouncil.ca/roving gyms. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
One of the stories we've been covering on Bridge City News is how Alberta Premier Daniel Smith is concerned about how the federal government is potentially looking at taking resource rights away from the provinces. And it all began with a comment from Justice Minister David Lametti. To chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Now, Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has weighed in on this. What did he have to say?
He said that his justice minister said no such thing. He wants you to watch the video of David Lametti saying, I'll look into this, and believe that it's not real. You know, when this happened late last week, the first thing that popped in my head, a guy I hadn't thought of in years, Hal, Baghdad Bob. Do you remember this guy? He was Saddam Hussein's information minister during the invasion of Iraq in the early 2000s. And he was quite literally on TV saying, oh, there's no Americans in Baghdad. And you can hear the tanks going by. So that's what Trudeau was like. Oh, no, my minister said no such thing. He was talking about UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. No, he was specifically asked about two things. And it's important to note this. He was asked about the Natural Resources Transfer Act of 1930. That's the one that gave resources rights to the Western provinces from Manitoba all the way through to BC. But another chief from Ontario asked generally about resource rights being taken away from the province, not just the Western provinces by rescinding that act. He wanted it across the whole country. So Trudeau denied, Lametti said it, he denied it was about these specific things. The video is quite clear. The video is crystal clear, and they're trying to get you to believe something other than the facts in front of you.
Now, Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe said he was offered a meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to discuss this very important issue, but he turned it down. Why would Moe not make the time to meet with the Prime Minister?
This was on Trudeau's recent trip to Regina, and the Premier Moe was scheduled to be in Prince Albert. If you haven't done that drive, it's quite the distance. Memory serves me correct, it's about 2.5 hours from Regina to Saskatoon, and then about the same from Saskatoon up to Prince Albert, in that range. So 4.5 to 5 hour drive one way. The Premier of Saskatchewan doesn't have a private jet that he takes all over the place the way the Prime Minister does. So he was offered the meeting at the last minute, and they said, you can have 5 minutes with the Prime Minister. That's insulting to the Premier of the province the Prime Minister's visiting, to say, yes, we can squeeze in 5 minutes for you. You know that he's meeting with all kinds of other people. The fact that they are politically at odds shouldn't stop them from attempting to work together. They have to work together. And in fact, on some issues, they've worked very well. But Trudeau clearly doesn't want to deal with this issue or the others that Moe said he needs to raise. And so Moe just said, I'm not giving up an already scheduled event and driving back from Prince Albert to Regina to meet the Prime Minister for 5 minutes. Just wasn't worth his time. He assured people he doesn't wake up in the morning trying to find new ways to fight with the Prime Minister, but sometimes it might feel like the Prime Minister wakes up in the morning trying to figure out how to fight with Western premiers.
Brian, we've chatted about the alleged secret Chinese police stations here in Canada, but so far, no one has been arrested or thrown out of the country. Now, in New York City recently, 2 men were arrested for allegedly the exact same thing. Why can't we arrest those who are allegedly setting up these so-called police stations here in Canada?
We don't have the legislative ability to do that. In the United States, they've got a foreign agents registry. And so if you're acting on behalf of a foreign government, it's like being a lobbyist. You've got to register. Your job is to be in Canada, acting on behalf of a foreign government, any government. You should have to register. Just like you're acting on behalf of a company and you're trying to speak to the government, you have to register in the Lobbyist Act. And if you don't, there are fines, there are penalties. That sort of thing should be happening. The Americans have that, and that's why these 2 men in New York City were charged. The best we could do here is go to these police stations. I call them intimidation stations. I believe I've told you I visited 3 in the Toronto area last fall. One was a convenience store, one was an office in an industrial park strip mall type thing, and another was a house. That doesn't mean that people weren't operating out of them, but these were the addresses that people would go out and harass Chinese Canadians. Well, the Americans take the harassment of Chinese Americans more seriously than we take the harassment of Chinese Canadians who came to this country for a reason, to escape what's going on in China. Here, we're allowing dissidents to be harassed because they speak out against the dictators in Beijing. In the United States, they don't. And these 2 guys arrested in New York, they're not the first, they're just the most high profile. And so we need to move towards this. The Trudeau government has rejected this in the past. They've recently said they're going to look into it. But then just Monday, the Prime Minister was saying, comparing it to internment camps of Japanese and Italian Canadians in the Second World War. I'm sorry, that one of these things is not like the other, as they said on Sesame Street. and they're definitely not the same thing. And by conflating them, he's actually playing into China's hands, because China says actions like this, having this foreign agents registry, is a form of racism to oppress Chinese people. That was the message they had in the last election to defeat conservative candidates like Kenny Chiu, who supported this idea.
And thanks for the trip down memory lane, Sesame Street. Love that. Brian, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said that he had no intersection with the Trudeau Foundation, but the alleged connections and news stories just keep popping up to the surface, including news that he vacationed at a Jamaican estate of a wealthy Trudeau Foundation donor over Christmas time. Did this break any ethics rules?
The ethics commissioner apparently cleared it ahead of time. Now, we don't know if this was cleared by former ethics commissioner Mario Dion, who has since stepped down, retired due to health reasons, or was it cleared by the sister-in-law of Dominic LeBlanc? You know, who was it that cleared this? Because that's who's in charge of the ethics commissioner office now. And so there's questions about that, but also, did the ethics commissioner were they informed that this was a wealthy donor to the Trudeau Foundation? It may not have broken any ethics laws, but it definitely looks odd when the Prime Minister says time and again, I have no intersection. I mean, what a weird way to speak to start with. I have no intersection with the Trudeau Foundation, and yet the connections keep coming. And so this gentleman, Peter Green, a longtime family friend of the Trudeau Foundation, or the Trudeau family, sorry, and a donor to the Trudeau Foundation, gave him his Jamaican estate for a Christmas vacation. Sounds an awful lot like the Aga Khan's Island and what went on there. So I think there's going to be a lot more questions about this.
So, Brian, Jamaica aside, you've investigated Prime Minister Trudeau's connections with the Trudeau Foundation, and you say there are far too many to not be concerned. Why is that?
Well, it's starting to seem like that Louis XIV statement, I am the state and the state is me. For Justin Trudeau, everything's connected back to him and the Trudeau Foundation and his family. This vacation, the Aga Khan's vacation, he says that he has no connections, direct or indirect, with the Trudeau Foundation. His family picks 3 of the members. His government picks 6 of the members, because the industry minister of the day is responsible for picking 6 members. Members of the foundation, the way it's structured, you have members and then you have the board. The members are more powerful because they pick the board. They can fire the board. So, he and his government and his family are helping pick this. Now, his office says he has recused himself from these decisions in the past, but it's still his government. It's still his family. The connections are there. You've got Morris Rosenberg, who wrote the report on the 2021 election, saying there was no election interference to be concerned about. Not that there was none, just it didn't rise to cross a threshold, I think was the term they used. Well, he's the former president and CEO of the Trudeau Foundation, the man that he hired to be a special rapporteur, former Governor General David Johnston. He has been one of these members of the Trudeau Foundation that I just talked about. He's now going to advise the government on this. You can look at the Senate appointments, where Conservative Senator Denise Batters has pointed out in the past, she called it the Trudeau farm team, because there's a bunch of people in the Senate who were chosen after connections with the Trudeau Foundation, and they were recommended by a panel that Trudeau put together to advise him on Senate appointments from people with connections to the Trudeau Foundation. So where does one end and the other begin? It is increasingly difficult to tell, and it's concerning. And if the Trudeau Foundation is going to continue to exist, and I don't think most Canadians would notice if it disappeared, if it's going to continue to exist, then the government has to get out of it. Let it be a foundation on its own, and stop with the government and family involvement like this, especially while the main guy in the family is the Prime Minister.
Brian, last week, Justin Trudeau's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, testified at a Commons committee into allegations of China's election interference. Did we learn anything new from her?
Not really. She was a case study in how not to say much. Her testimony I found to be self-serving. I found it to be selective, because she said, I can't talk about these allegations that have been in the media due to national security concerns, and then turned around and said that one of them was false, the claim that there was $250,000 divvied up among 11 Toronto area candidates in the 2019 election. Well, if you can't talk about Fight Club, you can't talk about Fight Club. So why is she saying I can't talk about all these issues due to national security, but she's talking about this particular instance? If she was in the United States and taking the fifth, as they say, that would have nullified her ability to take the fifth. In our system, we don't have the same rules. Neither do we have a committee system that's as robust as what they have in the United States or in the United Kingdom. She was asked questions at times such as, when was the Prime Minister told about this? When did he find out? That's not covered by national security. She would give answers that were non-answers and say she couldn't say. Well, this is why you were called. You could have brushed up. You could have reviewed your notes. Instead, she gave evasive testimony. It was very frustrating to watch, par for the course. And you know that I'm not a fan of public inquiries. I don't like them, but I don't see a way around this anymore other than calling a public inquiry into China's election interference, because our current government wants to keep things covered up.
There's a potential work stoppage by more than 150,000 federal workers. So what are the issues and what services may be impacted, Brian?
You might not be able to get your passport, but will that really change? Passport services will be affected. Taxes. We're in the middle of tax season. And if you haven't filed your taxes yet, well, that could cause you some headaches. Whether you're a business that has to file by a certain time or an individual hoping for a refund, all these things are going to be problematic. Pensions could be affected, although the union says they'll keep people in place to make sure that people are getting their required payments. We're also talking about admin support for the RCMP. So, that's a lot of workers, 155,000 going on strike at once. The main issues are wages, but there's also weird stuff, like they want a social justice fund, and it would work out to about $3 million a year that taxpayers would fork over for the union to run political campaigns. I don't think that's what we need to be doing. I don't think we need to be paying for unconscious bias training that the union is asking for. On wages, look, they haven't had a significant wage increase in quite some time. Everyone's dealing with the cost of living. So absolutely, they want a pay increase. But what they're asking for is well above what the government's offering, well above what other collective agreements from major outlets have been able to garner in terms of wage settlements. For the tax workers, for example, they want an immediate 9% increase, followed by a number of annual increases that work out to 30% pay bump in 3 years. That's not sustainable. That's not what most Canadians are getting, but they're going to be asked to foot the bill on this. So it's going to be very tense few hours. Maybe they strike a deal as we're speaking, maybe later tonight. If it's not tonight, then yeah, this goes to a strike first thing tomorrow morning.
Wow. Brian, CBC is pretty upset with Twitter CEO Elon Musk after he labeled the public broadcaster as government-funded media. Now, the move even caused a bit of a political storm here in Canada. Can you explain?
Well, it caused a political storm because Pierre Poilievre had written to Twitter and said, hey, you've labeled National Public Radio in the States government-funded media or affiliated media. You've done the same to the BBC. What about Canada? So he did it this week. Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh, the coalition of the willing, I guess, they both took him to task, saying that he's attacking Canadian culture with the help of an American billionaire. He's trying to take down CBC. They got a tag on Twitter that they're government-funded media. That's not an attack. That's true. Now, CBC protested. They've said they're going to cease their operations on Twitter. They're not going to use the platform anymore over this. And they said that they're fully independent of government. I don't believe that. A lot of Canadians don't believe that, Hal. But when they did protest and say we're less than 70% government funded, Musk altered their tag and put them down as 69% government funded. So he's having a bit of fun with them. He did live in Canada. His mother's originally from Saskatchewan. He spent time there as a kid. He went to Queen's University in Ontario. He's very familiar with the country, and I think he's having a bit of fun with CBC at the moment.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.
You know, despite all of the emojis and grammar police on social media these days, we all know the importance of reading and writing here in our world. Education is a building block to our society. And naturally, as society changes, attitudes and techniques for life and education change over time as well. Now, to chat about this in more detail, especially about reading, writing, but not arithmetic, and the changes to education over the years, is the interim dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Lethbridge, Dr. Robin Bright. Dr. Bright, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Now, you had a pretty distinguished career in education, and I'm sure that during your time as an educator, much has changed over the years. Is there something you feel has been the biggest change in education? What has really jumped out for you?
Well, I think in terms of my area, which is reading instruction, I think there's been a change in emphasis over the years. So, for instance, when I first started teaching, we talked a lot about the reading wars, and there being a debate about how best to teach reading. And over the last several decades, I think we've received, I think, more clarity in terms of what really matters in teaching reading. And so I think we're in a different place for educators and for parents to really know what matters when it comes to teaching reading. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest changes or things that have evolved over the last 20 to 30 years.
You know, I remember when I was a kid, my friends would say, I want to kick back with a good book. Do you still hear young people saying that today?
Well, I would say you hear it sometimes. It's probably not necessarily an activity that many kids gravitate to first. However, a lot depends on, how they've been, how reading has been talked about in their homes, how effective teachers and librarians have been in encouraging them to read. So in schools, I think teachers are doing a really good job at helping students find books that really matter to them so that they can do just, as you say, kick back and enjoy a good book. But there are a lot of things competing with kids' time right now. So it does make it a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, especially social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or TikTok. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, which takes up a lot of children's time. Now, what would you say are the challenges for students and for educators in this year that were maybe not in consideration 20 years ago, outside of social media?
Well, I mean, you've raised the most important one, and that is that there's so much time for screens. And unfortunately, if it's not monitored, then that can be a really negative influence in children's lives. There's a fabulous site called Media Smarts, which I, go to a lot in order to look at new research that's available. And they give you some really great ideas about how to monitor screen time. For instance, children under the age of 2, most experts are saying should not have any screen time or very, very little because it interferes with the development of language. It makes them a little bit less interested in the world around them. And then from that age up, it's just really important to monitor the time that kids spend online and also to be part of it with kids so that it's not something that they do all on their own. There's time for education, thinking about what it is that you're doing. But screen time would be the big change, I think, in children's lives over the last several decades.
And as a parent, myself, I have 2 kids, they're in their 20s now, but I remember when my daughter was 10 or 11 years old and she wanted to start up a Facebook account. And I'm really concerned, like a lot of other parents, about predators who are out there going after our children, posing as someone else. So you have to really be careful about where your kids are going online and at what age at the same time. So how do you see teachers and educators evolving, Dr. Bright, evolving with their techniques to counteract the changes that we see in society today?
Well, if we are talking specifically about young children, and especially coming out of a pandemic, one of the things I think that teachers are really focused on is how to set the foundations for early reading. And, some children miss those opportunities by not being in school over the last, on a regular basis over the last several years. So one of the ways that teachers of young children are helping to combat this is by making sure that they're focused on, I think, 2 really important aspects when it comes to teaching reading. Oral language, so helping children to, have those conversations, sing, use chants, rhyming, lots of Mother Goose, because they've missed out on those kinds of opportunities to really develop a strong oral language base upon which learning to read is based. So they're moving children from this, really environment that focuses on oral language into, written language. And in written language, of course, they're focused on how language works. So really helping kids understand that sound symbol relationship, getting them to understand that it's important to sound outwards. And using writing too. Watching children write naturally helps teachers figure out how they're making sense of language when they're learning to read. So I think that's what I'm seeing teachers, especially in the early grades, kindergarten through grade 3, focus on with their students.
It's interesting now. I'll sit down with a pen to paper, try my cursive writing because I'm on a keyboard all day. I've kind of lost the knack here. It's like, ooh, that does not look good at all. That looks kind of, I need to practice this a little bit more, Because like they say, if you don't use it, you lose it, I guess. Now, we've heard a lot about changes to the curriculum here in our province in Alberta. Can you speak to the new curriculum in kindergarten through grade 3? Do you think it will benefit kids and improve learning outcomes?
Yeah, so the new curriculum has come in, and I think teachers have had an opportunity over the last little while. Certainly, we have in teacher education to really examine what's in there. And what I'll say is the focus on beginning reading is not bad. As a matter of fact, I think it's helped teachers recognize how important the foundational skills in learning to read are. But I would say there are things that are still missing from that curriculum, and that teachers want to be aware of and make sure that their programs also encapsulate. So, for instance, reading to children, demonstrating how important fluency is. So when kids hear teachers read out loud to them, interesting stories that they want to be a part of, that is as important as setting those foundational skills where children are learning to sound outwards. So while I think it's a great way to emphasize the foundational reading skills, I think as teachers and as researchers, we don't want to forget that there are many other aspects to a really strong literacy program that we don't want to overlook. And I would say one of them for sure is developing that oral language. Another is reading out loud to kids. Another one is writing, making sure children have lots of opportunities to scribble and draw and, make letters. So those are the kinds of things that I just think the new curriculum doesn't address as strongly as it does those foundational reading skills, which really refer to developing phonics knowledge and what we call phonemic awareness. But really what they refer to is word work, decoding words. But I think the great thing is we're talking about beginning reading in a way that I don't know that we've done for a while now.
And I'm sure that the engagement of parents is critical for a child's learning and the way they think and the way they formulate their personalities. I'm thinking back to when I was a child and my parents would sometimes read me Bible stories, which I thought was kind of cool. Learning about Jesus, learning about David and Goliath and Samson, some powerful stories in God's Word. And at the same time, there were nursery rhymes too, which were a lot of fun as well. How important is it to have the parents engaged in their children's lives at such an early age when it comes to reading?
Yeah, it's essential, truly, and it sets a foundation. It makes children realize that reading is important. So I would say that for parents, one of the most important things you can do is read to and with your children. Find the amazing array of children's literature that's available in libraries. If you don't have a library card or you're not visiting the library yet, it's never too late to start the habit. Librarians are absolutely brilliant at helping to match readers to texts that will matter to them and be interesting to them. And they can be texts like a silly text like Dog Man and Captain Underpants, and they can be, more traditional stories like The Secret Garden. But there's so many books in between those two formats and genres. So you can really get kids interested in text by helping to make sure you understand how much is available out there. So yes, we may remember our familiar, our favorite texts, but in this day and age, there is so much much Canadian and really great Canadian children's and young adult literature that there's no excuse not to find the book that matches the reader.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up. I'm kind of curious as to why children sometimes fall behind when it comes to their reading skills, you know, their comprehension and what they take in, what they absorb. Is it because maybe sometimes the subject matter really doesn't interest them that much?
Well, there can be a variety of reasons, truly, for declining student interest in reading. Yes, you're correct. Sometimes it is the actual topic might be less interesting. It could be the format too. So parents often ask me, is it all right for my child to be reading graphic novels? Shouldn't they be reading? And sometimes they use this term, real books. But graphic novels are extremely complex, and they do contain interesting storylines and characters, and the interesting thing about graphic novels is because there's not as much text in them as there might be in more traditional books. Kids have to engage in comprehension skills in a way that they might not have to in other texts, especially the skill of inferencing. And that simply means that you have to figure out, what's happening in a story when it is not said directly. So yes, they are great kinds of texts, but there are many different reasons why children's interest might decline. So we've talked about interest, but it could also be because of a certain reading skill. So decoding, could be a struggle for students. Fluency could be a struggle as well. So not being able to read at the same speed at which you speak. And if that's a problem, there are many strategies that teachers know about and will engage kids in order to, develop that particular skill. But teachers are pretty good at figuring out where the problem lies and then, taking the necessary interventions that might be needed.
I remember in school we were forced to read this book called Watership Down about a bunch of bunny rabbits going to work, and I got to tell you, it was the most boring thing, and I fell asleep and I lost interest. But fortunately, around the same time, the movie came out, Watership Down. I'm like, this is great. I just go see the movie and do the book report on that. Unfortunately, the ending of the movie was totally different from the book. So needless to say, it didn't end very well for Hal here. But anyway,
right.
Digital readers are now used in schools quite a bit, Dr. Bright. Do you see the increase in technology as a benefit, or does maybe research show something a little different?
Well, technology and teaching reading through things like ebooks and digital reading programs are being used, and I think they're being used effectively in classrooms. The evidence is sort of mixed in terms of the effect that they have. So the literature that I've reviewed in this area tends to show that it doesn't necessarily contribute to effective statistically significant gains. However, it may very well be something that is really interesting to some students and might hook them into reading in a way that traditional kinds of reading might not. But they're being used in classrooms, and they're technological tools that I think can be effective for some students and interesting for some students. But overall, they're not necessarily a panacea in terms of really contributing to better reading skills overall for children.
You know, with teenagers nowadays, the competition for eyeballs and attention you talk about in some ways to engage teens in reading and writing, how else can we do it outside of maybe ebooks and the traditional books that we get at the library?
Well, there are a number of things that I know teachers and librarians do. Book talks is one of the most effective ways, and I've been very fortunate to be invited into a number of schools where the teacher and the librarian and I will simply bring forward a ton of new books on a variety of topics, and we'll talk just for a couple of minutes. We'll try to leave kids a bit on a cliffhanger to get them really interested in new texts. And I've seen that really work because not one person can't really know all the books that are out there, but a group of teachers and parents and librarians can get together and share a number of different books with children and try to pique their interest. So book talking is something that we really stress as being a creative strategy that teachers can use. The other thing is helping kids talk together about books. Often they can really influence one another. So having kids, get together in small groups in libraries and in classrooms and talk a little bit about the last book that they read can also encourage their peers to become more excited and interested. But I will say, what happens in the home is really, really important. And so I think, parents just taking that active interest in what their kids are reading, introducing books to them. And if they're not, strong readers themselves, sharing a book together can be a great experience. So reading a book together, even as children get older into the middle grades, can be a really rewarding experience.
It's all about developing those building blocks. Dr. Robin Wright is Interim Dean at the Faculty of Education at the University of Lethbridge. Dr. Wright, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.